Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to each and every one of you to the Learn from the Legends, an international bi-monthly webinar series organized by NNF Kerala and IAP Neonatology Chapter. Today we have an eminent speaker, Professor Neena Modi. She is a professor of neonatal medicine, Imperial College, London, UK. And the topic for the day would be feeding the very preterm baby, current concepts and recent advances. And we will have two eminent moderators also. Professor Swarnareka Bhatt from Bangalore and Dr. Mahendra Jain from Bhopal, Madhya Pradesh. Now I hand over to Dr. V.C. Manoj for further proceedings of the event. Over to Manoj. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Hearty welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which area of the world you are in. Today, I have the great honor to introduce to this August gathering another great legend, Professor Neena Modi. Neena Modi is Professor of Neonatal Medicine at Imperial College, London. She is the immediate past president of UK Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health and president-elect of the British Medical Association. She is a consultant at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital and also the president of the UK Medical Women's Federation. Professor Modi has made many contributions to health services with previous national roles that include President of the UK Neonatal Society, President of the Academic Pediatrics Association of Great Britain and Ireland, Chair of the British Medical Journal Ethics Committee, Trustee of the charities Their World and Action Cerebral Palsy, an elected fellow and member of the Council of the Academy of Medical Sciences. I can go on, and I would be standing between you and the great lecture that is going to come up. We all know she is a head of a multidisciplinary neonatal research group focused on prematurity and the nutritional requirements determinants of lifelong health. So we had no doubt when we thought about this topic whom to approach to request to give this lecture. Her group were winners of the 2018 Royal College of Physicians of London Excellence in Patients Care Award for innovation of the National Neonatal Research Database, a roadmap for NHS Big Data to improve services and patient outcomes. Professor Neena has over 300 research publications and commentaries and reviews and chapters in textbooks. She directs the highly regarded Neonatal Update, the Science of Newborn Care, an annual week-long international academic conference we all have heard of. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Professor Neena Modi, the legend of the day. Over to you, madam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manoj. Dr. Ravi, you've been very kind in your comments, but it's a great honor for me to be here. And I've just been watching the number of participants come in from around the world. It's a truly fantastic teaching series that you've put together. So my very, very great congratulations to all of you. It's absolutely wonderful what you're doing for newborn medicine. Now, let me share my screen and please tell me if you can see that all right.
It's perfect, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much. So welcome everybody, and thank you very much for giving up your hour to join us. I just wish I could see you all other than see you in your pictures or in person rather than names on the screen, but welcome everyone. So I'm going to talk about feeding the very preterm baby, and I'm going to concentrate on enteral feeding, milk feeding. There may be some questions about parenteral feeding, but the time that we have isn't sufficient to go to all of these. Now, unfortunately, there we go. I hope that my slide is advanced. Can you see the advanced slide okay? I'm going to talk about the following issues. Fresh own mother's milk. Do we try hard enough to obtain it? Whether we should use pasteurized human donor milk or formula to supplement feeds when there is insufficient own mother's milk. Whether or not milk fortifiers are necessary, the timing of starting and the speed of advancing milk feeds, a very brief word about probiotics, about enteral feeding during blood transfusion, and finally, international collaboration to resolve uncertainties in newborn care. So I think there is no neonatologist in the world who would disagree with the fact that we should be trying our utmost to make sure there is own mother's milk available for our very preterm babies. And so the first question I would like to ask you is, do you in your neonatal unit routinely audit the proportion of very preterm babies who go home breastfeeding? Dr. Manoj, could we have the first poll, please? Excellent. Excellent. So 62% of you say yes, and 38% of you say no. Now, the reason this is important is going to be illustrated, oops, sorry, the slide, on this slide here. And so in the UK, as indeed in most of your neonatal units, because this is such an important issue, we measure the proportion of very preterm babies who go home breastfeeding. And in the UK, the average is around about 60%, 58% in 2019, slightly better in 2020, so but about 60%. But you will see from the graph in the right-hand corner of this slide that some neonatal regions, some neonatal networks in the UK have got very high breastfeeding rates for very preterm babies, up to 80%. Others have got very low rates. So all of us can actually improve what we're doing. And the best way to improve what we're doing is not just to try harder, but also to measure what we do and make sure that we have improvements year on year. Now, how can we improve breastfeeding or expression of breast milk for very preterm babies? And again, there are very many marked differences in the way in which our neonatal services are organized around the world, but I've put up some of the areas where we as neonatologists can really try our utmost. We can, of course, facilitate close contact between mothers and babies, provide accommodation for mothers, provide good facilities for mothers to express breast milk. We should also aim to transition babies to suck feeds at the breast as soon as possible, because the sooner we stop meddling with the amount of milk that we give a baby and allow a baby to self-regulate their own intake, the better it will be for the baby. We need a very positive approach by all neonatal staff, all obstetric staff as well. In fact, everyone who is involved in the care of the mother and baby. I've already talked about measuring success, but as national organizations, and so you in India have the National Neonatology Forum, and you have the neonatology chapter of the Indian Academy of Pediatrics, but these are very, very important opportunities for national bodies to lobby for supportive national policies, one of which, of course, is about parental leave. At the moment, breastfeeding considerably disadvantages women, because a woman who takes 6 to 12 months off work to breastfeed will develop a lifelong pay and career progression gap. And if she's a poor woman, she's much more likely to be disproportionately disadvantaged, because if she stops work to breastfeed, she is more likely to lose her job completely. So the babies of disadvantaged women are less likely to be breastfed, which will amplify transgenerational health inequalities. This difficulty can, of course, be mitigated by much, much fairer parental leave policies. And this is an issue for our national neonatal organizations throughout the world. The next question is whether or not we should use pasteurized human donor milk or preterm formula when there's insufficient mother's milk. Many units have access to human milk banks, but what I'd like to do now is talk to you about the pros and cons of using pasteurized donor milk versus preterm formula to make up insufficient maternal milk. The first thing, of course, to appreciate is that pasteurized human donor milk is not the same as fresh own mother's milk, because pasteurization reduces immune benefits and it eliminates probiotic species and it eliminates bile salt stimulated lipase activity as examples. You'll see on this slide a summary of the changes that happen with pasteurization. It's a review published by Hard et al. In Active Pediatrica in 2018. Now, newer methods of pasteurization may help retain non-nutritional benefits, but of course this is uncertain. So human milk is really precision medicine for babies. There are benefits for mothers and babies, there are immunological benefits, psychological benefits, but we should bear in mind that the composition of human milk differs from mother to mother and is unique to each individual mother. The hormonal content, the immune factors, the oligosaccharide profile, the prebiotic and probiotic content are all different from mother to mother. And we should also remember that the nutrient and non-nutrient composition is affected by mother's health, by her disease, her diet, and her environmental exposures. So that, for example, the concentrations of leptins, cytokines, trans fats, long-chain fatty acids, and environmental toxins are very different from mother to mother. In addition, the nutrient density, in other words, the carbohydrate, protein, and fat content is very variable in human milk. It varies between mothers, within feeds, and with duration of lactation. So the bottom line is that fresh own mother's milk and pasteurized human donor milk are not equivalent. What does the Cochrane review say, the Cochrane library say about using formula or pasteurized human donor milk to supplement insufficient mother's milk for preterm or low birth weight infants? Well, this is the most recent review published in July 2019 from Maria Quigley and colleagues. They identified only 5 trials comparing formula versus donor milk as a supplement to own mother's milk. These trials were carried out, one of the, Lucas et al. Was carried out in 1984, a very long time ago, and the most recent was carried out in 2018. But only a total of 1,300 infants have been recruited to these 5 trials. Now, if you look at these 4 cardinal outcomes, necrotizing enterocolitis, invasive infection, all-cause mortality, and neurodevelopmental disability at 18 months, you will see that the risk ratios all span 1. The 95% confidence intervals for the risk ratios all span 1. And that means that the results are inconclusive. There is a very strong level of uncertainty. And the numbers of babies in each of these groups of studies show that the studies are underpowered. They do not have sufficient power to really detect a meaningful difference in these important outcomes. And it is not surprising, therefore, that the authors concluded that further randomized studies of feeding with formula versus donor breast milk are needed. Might there be harms from using pasteurized human donor milk? Well, one of the most recent randomized controlled trials to be done was from Debbie O'Connor's group in Canada. This was published in JAMA in 2016, and they recruited 363 infants to this randomized trial. They advanced enteral feeds only up to 160 mils per kilo. They provided nutrient fortification using bovine-based fortifiers, cow milk-based fortifiers, and they added additional protein to donor milk. But what they found was no statistically significant difference in the mean Bayley-3 cognitive or motor scores between the 2 randomized groups, but they also found that more children in the donor milk group had cognitive composite scores indicative of neuroimpairment. The adjusted risk difference was 10.6%, and this was a statistically significant difference. So There are other concerns about using pasteurized donor milk. And this is the fact that around the world, and indeed in India as well, in Bengaluru, there have been recent scandals because private companies have been buying milk, usually from very poor mothers, and then pasteurizing it, processing it, and selling it for profit. Now, we all as neonatologists know that the aggressive marketing of formula has been very damaging to newborn health. But we must now ask the question whether aggressive marketing by a commercial human milk industry might be as unacceptable and as damaging as aggressive marketing by the formula milk industry. This is why, for example, Cambodia banned the purchase and export of human breast milk because Cambodian women, poor Cambodian women, were selling their milk, which was then being exported to the United States to be sold. So watch this space. So to summarize this part of my talk, what are the pros and cons of pasteurized human milk versus preterm formula for supplementing insufficient own mother's milk? Well, pasteurized human milk may retain some non-nutritive benefits, but it may also reduce motivation to express. It may give mothers a false sense of security. And don't forget that the nutrient content and composition is very variable, reflecting the donor's genotype, her diet, her health, the medicine she may take, and the environmental toxins to which she's exposed. Human milk requires phosphate, vitamin, and mineral supplements. It is expensive. From a UK not-for-profit milk bank, pasteurized donor milk costs between 90 to 150 pounds per litre, and from commercial for-profit suppliers, it costs between 100 to an eye-watering 2,200 pounds per litre. I've already mentioned the growing commercialization and payment to donors raise ethical concerns. On the other hand, preterm formula has also very uncertain non-nutritive benefits, if any. It may also reduce motivation to express, but the composition is consistent and the nutrient content is consistent, and it is a highly quality controlled product. It already contains essential vitamins, minerals, and trace elements, and it is relatively inexpensive compared with pasteurized donor milk. However, it is also a commercial product, and there are also ethical concerns around aggressive marketing. But the bottom line is that the necessary tests have not yet been met for pasteurized human donor milk. This is evidence of efficacy, effectiveness, safety, cost benefit, and evidence that the commercial human milk industry will not have adverse impact. And so whether pasteurized human donor milk or preterm formula is better option to supplement insufficient own mother's milk is as yet unknown. What about fortifier? So fortification refers to the practice of enriching human milk feeds for very preterm babies with macronutrients, minerals, and vitamins. Fortification is standard of care in some, but not all parts of the world. A way back, fortification initially consisted of simply adding fat and carbohydrates to infant feeds or a scoop of infant formula powder. The first commercial fortifiers came onto the market in the 1990s. The initial products provided less than 1 gram of protein per 100 mils of human milk, but current fortifiers provide about 10 to 20% nutrient enrichment. All of them contain minerals and vitamins. They all contain protein and carbohydrate, and some provide fats. And they are available in both powder or liquid form. And most recently, commercial products made from pooled human milk are now becoming available in some parts of the world. Now, advocates for routine fortification cite the need for very high protein intakes in very preterm babies and the goal of achieving the size of a full-term baby at the term. Are these rational justifications? So, let's consider first a recommendation from the European Society for Pediatric Gastroenterology, Hepatology and Nutrition. They said that empirical data show that a weight gain approximating to that in utero can be achieved with a non-protein energy intake of 70 kilocalories per kilo per day and a protein intake of 3 grams per kilo per day. They then said that protein supply needs to compensate for the accumulated protein deficit observed in almost all small preterm infants, and therefore protein intake can be increased to a maximum of 4.5 grams per kilo per day depending on the magnitude of the accumulated deficit. And they then said, we therefore recommend aiming at 4 to 4.5 grams per kilo per day for infants up to 1,000 grams and 3.5 to 4 grams for infants between 1,000 to 1,800 grams. Now, this statement was issued in 2010. Does it hold good for 2021? Well, let's consider the theoretical basis a bit further. This is a classic slide from neonatal medicine published by Den and Poindexter in 2007. On the y-axis, you see whole body protein content. On the x-axis, you see age in days up to 7 days. The round circles show what happens if you give a baby 1 gram per kilo per day of intravenous amino acids. The triangles show what happens if you give a baby intravenous glucose alone. This shows quite clearly that if you only use glucose, the baby will steadily lose and rapidly lose whole body protein content. If you give 1 gram per kilo per day, you will stop this catabolic loss of whole body protein. But if you give 3 grams per kilo per day, you will start to approximate to what's shown in the square with the squares, which is the intrauterine protein accretion rate. Now, 3 grams per kilo of parenteral amino acids is equivalent to about 2.5 grams per kilo of protein. In 2021, babies should not develop a postnatal protein deficit because we start milk feeds on day 1 and we advance as tolerated as quickly up to 30 mils per kilo per day. And I'll come back to that point in a moment. And we also have the opportunity to provide parenteral nutrition as backup for our most immature babies. So most babies in 2021 should not accumulate a postnatal protein deficit. Now, bear that in mind and let me consider the next step, and that is that the protein content of human milk is very variable. These are summary slides taken from a systematic review and meta-analysis published by Tanis Fenton and her group in BMC Pediatrics. The upper right-hand panel shows the protein content of preterm milk, so milk from a mother who delivers preterm, and milk from a mother who delivers at full term. The solid lines are term mothers, and the dotted lines are preterm mothers. And you can see that protein content for both preterm and term mothers is quite high in the first month, but it is higher amongst mothers who deliver preterm. And the average content of preterm milk protein in the first month is 1.5 grams per 100 mils, with a range that is very wide, going from 0.7 to 2.4 grams of protein per 100 mils. Energy content of both preterm and term milk is much more stable. You'll see that from these lines here, and ranges about 50 to 80 kilocalories per 100 mils, with an average of around 70 kilocalories. So what does that mean for us as clinicians? Well, before I give you the implications of routine fortification, let me show you, let me summarize this data for you and suggest that if you're interested in reading further, please go to this paper in Seminars in Fetal and Neonatal Medicine in 2021. A preterm baby receiving 200 mils per kilo per day of unfortified own mother's milk will on average have a protein intake of 3 grams per kilo per day, but the range will be wide up to 4.8 grams per kilo per day. Given that commercial breast milk fortifiers provide about 1.1 to 2.4 grams of protein per 100 mils of milk, routine fortification will mean that some babies will receive a very high protein intake, exceeding 5 grams per kilo per day. There is another issue if you use a liquid fortifier, because these displace substantial volumes of fresh mother's milk. And we do have evidence to suggest that there is a dose-response relationship for the benefits from fresh maternal milk, and therefore reducing maternal milk intake by displacing it by using liquid fortifiers would not seem to be wise. The bottom line here is that both very high and very low protein intakes are dangerous, and therefore if you give routine fortification, some babies are in danger of being harmed. The harms from very high protein intakes are increased sepsis, impaired neurodevelopment, aminoacidemia, possibly poor head growth, longer ventilation and greater risk of bronchopulmonary dysplasia, obesity and abdominal adiposity, renal impairment, higher mortality, and more rapid weight gain. These are not insignificant concerns. What does the Cochrane Library say? Well, again, here is the most recent Cochrane Library review of multi-nutrient fortification of human milk for preterm infants, published in 2020. There have been only 8 trials with 1,400 participating infants. Only a single trial carried out in 1996, over a quarter of a century ago, assessed neurodevelopment at 18 months. And for necrotizing enterocolitis, which is a key concern for clinicians, the risk ratio spans 1, again, showing that the evidence is unclear. And therefore, again, these authors concluded evidence is insufficient to show whether multi-nutrient fortification has any benefits for very preterm babies or any risk. We have carried out a pilot randomized controlled trial comparing fortified human milk, unfortified human milk, or preterm formula to make up any shortfall in a mother's milk. This has been submitted for publication, but I can tell you the results now. We assessed body composition at full term and at term plus 6 weeks, and we found no differences in growth or body composition. So the study appears safe, it appears acceptable to parents, and we now want to proceed to a large, well-powered international trial to address this question. And I will say more about this at the end of my talk. We used a whole body MRI technique to measure body composition. So it was a very accurate measure of body composition. And as I say, there was no difference between the groups. Now, the next reason that's often cited for routine fortification is this statement from the American Academy of Pediatrics, so way back in 1977, saying the goal of feeding regimens for low birth weight infants is to obtain a prompt postnatal resumption of growth to a rate approximating intrauterine growth. Now, that statement, which was based on prevailing opinion at the time, has been very widely interpreted as meaning that it's optimal for a very preterm baby to reach the size of a full-term baby. So, Dr. Manoj, could I have my second poll question, please?
Sure, ma'am. Just give me a minute.
Sure. This is the question while it's going up. Would you like your very preterm baby to weigh the same as full-term babies? So 28% say yes, and 72% say no. Well, let's examine the evidence around this question. So, first of all, please bear in mind that babies who are born preterm usually weigh less than they would have weighed had they remained in utero. In other words, they're usually growth restricted. And that, of course, is not difficult to understand because preterm birth is evidence of a pregnancy that has had some problems. And we all know that when there are problems with the human body, one of the first ways in which it is affected in pediatric practice is for growth to be impacted. So this graph shows you estimated fetal weight for solid lines compared with actual birth weight, which are the dashed lines. And you'll see that the dashed lines, particularly at the low gestational ages, are below the solid lines. If you want to achieve the weights, the two questions I asked are, do you want to achieve the weight that the baby would have had if she'd remained in utero? Or do you want to achieve the weight velocity that the baby would have had in utero? If you want to achieve the red question, then this is the line. The red line is the line you would be aiming to follow on a baby's growth chart. If you want to follow the blue goal, achieving the weight velocity the baby would have had in utero, then you would be following the blue line. Now, in the first case, weight gain will be rapid and will exceed fetal velocity. And this will mean that the baby will achieve the weight of a baby born at full term, either before or at full term. In the blue case, in the second case, the baby will follow the same intrauterine weight gain velocity, but will weigh less at term than a full term counterpart. And so what happens in real life? Well, we have just published just a few weeks ago a 12-year whole population study involving some 90,000 infants. This was published in Lancet Child and Adolescent Health. It was an observational study of the weight gain of boys and girls born very preterm. The gestational age ranges from 22 weeks, which is the brown line, up to 31 weeks, which is the blue line. We removed all the babies who had a major morbidity, which left us with about 45,000 babies who were healthy with no major morbidities at discharge. And what we found was very interesting, which was that despite substantial variation in nutrient practice, because nutritional practice does vary throughout the UK, as indeed it does throughout the world, weight velocity in all gestational age groups stabilized at about 32 weeks post-menstrual age at 16 to 25 grams per day along parallel centile lines. And weight at term is consistently below birth weight centile. Now, other groups around the world with smaller data sets certainly, but have shown the same findings. In addition, Tanis Fenton, who has done a lot of research in this area, she has shown that growth, so weight, length, and head circumference at full term, does not predict later neurodevelopment. So again, the bottom line here is that the optimal weight gain and growth rate of the preterm baby is uncertain. And therefore, if you are doing nutritional research, weight gain is a very poor marker of nutritional outcomes or nutritional success and should not be the primary outcome for nutritional studies. We should be using neurodevelopment and other important outcomes like necrotizing enterocolitis as the primary goals. And also, I would urge caution and would say we should not try and force a preterm baby to reach the weight of a full-term baby by full term. The reason for that is that over 8 decades of research in every single species studied, including humans, shows that there is an adverse impact of accelerated weight gain, especially after a period of growth restriction. We already know through very large epidemiological studies carried out in many parts of the world that our very preterm babies are at substantially higher risk of a whole range of chronic non-communicable diseases when they grow up. Hypertension, type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, lipid disorders, ischemic heart disease, heart failure, chronic kidney disease, all are much, much higher in prevalence in extremely preterm babies when they grow up. And indeed, they have a shorter lifespan. Now, we don't know what causes this yet. It's an important area of research, but we do know that accelerated weight gain will make this potentially worse. And that's why there should be caution about trying to promote rapid weight gain in the early neonatal period. If you're interested in reading about this more, please read this review by Casey Crump, which was published in the Neonatal Update Special Edition of Early Human Development in November 2020. To finish now, a few final comments. I'm always asked about probiotics, so I put in this slide, which is a very, very helpful summary position paper from the European Society for Pediatric Gastroenterology, Hepatology and Nutrition, published just last year. They reviewed all the trials to date, which have included an amazing 10,000 infants recruited to trials to date. That's amazing, but what's sad is that yet good evidence remains lacking. It remains lacking because these trials, of which there are very many, upwards of 30 trials, have got huge variation in baseline necrotizing enterocolitis rates, case definition, dose of probiotic, duration of probiotic, outcomes, and in the enteral feeding regimen, which of course is also likely to affect the outcomes. They summarize the potential hazards of probiotics, which are systemic infection, metabolic side effects, immune modulation, transfer of antibiotic resistance genes, gastrointestinal side effects, and very, very variable product quality control. And this is because probiotics are largely marketed as nutritional supplements and not as medicines. Most trials carried out to date did not monitor adverse effects. So we just don't know. We just don't know whether probiotics are safe. And there are very plausible mechanisms of adverse effects, which are listed in this slide here and which I won't bother to read out in the interest of time. But their conditional recommendation, with a very low certainty of evidence and only if safety issues are met, is that neonatal units which have got a very, very high prevalence of necrotizing enterocolitis may consider using either Lactobacillus rhamnosus or a combination of Bifidobacterium infantis, Bifidobacterium lactis, and Streptococcus thermophilus. But unfortunately, there is no magic bullet for necrotizing enterocolitis. Final couple of slides. Increasing feeds by 30 mils per kilo per day, if tolerated, is safe in very preterm babies. This was shown very nicely in the SIFT trial, which was published in the New England Journal of Medicine a couple of years ago and randomized over 2,800 babies to receiving daily milk increments of either 30 mils per kilo per day or 18 mils per kilo per day. The primary outcome was survival without moderate or severe neurodevelopmental disability at 24 months, and there was absolutely no evidence of any difference between the groups, 65.5% versus 68%. So if the baby's tolerating milk feeds, advance by up to 30 mils per kilo per day to about 200 mils per kilo per day. Another question I'm often asked is about transfusion, blood transfusion related necrotizing enterocolitis. There are very plausible pathophysiological mechanisms whereby milk feeds, enteral feeds might increase the risk of gut injury and necrotizing enterocolitis. These are summarized by this paper from Rose, Saroha, and Patel, published in Clinics in Perinatology in 2020. But again, randomized controlled trial evidence is not there yet. We've carried out a pilot trial, the WHEAT trial, which was funded by the UK Medical Research Council and showed no difference in whether or not you withhold fields or you continue fields during transfusion. That was a pilot study, and I'm now happy to say that funding has been secured from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research for a large multinational trial, which will start in January 2022. So to finish, what do we know about enteral feeds for very preterm babies in 2021? First of all, that we should give fresh colostrum, mother's milk as soon as possible, do not delay. We should increase fresh maternal milk feeds by around 30 mils per kilo per day as tolerated to at least 200 mils per kilo per day. We should supplement mother's milk routinely with phosphate and vitamins, and we should use parenteral nutrition for as short time as possible because parenteral nutrition is extremely dangerous. We should transition to suck feeds at the breast as soon as possible because babies regulate their own milk intake and their own nutrient intake very, very nicely indeed. The benefit to risk of pasteurized human donor milk versus formula as a supplement to own mother's milk is uncertain, as are the benefits of probiotics, as is the routine fortification. Promotion of rapid weight gain and fortification of every baby may be harmful, which means that we really must, as neonatologists globally, support research to resolve uncertainties and advocate for national policies that do not penalize women for breastfeeding. If you are interested in joining our planned international preterm nutrition trials or eNewborn, our new international neonatal database for benchmarking and for research, please email enewborn@imperial.ac.uk. You would be very, very welcome to join us, and there's absolutely no charge for benchmarking function or to join this international collaborative. I would end by saying thank you to my research group, our collaborators, the babies we care for and their families, and also invite all of you to join me at the Neonatal Update 2021, which will take place between November 29 and December 3rd this year. Registration is open, and I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you very much, Dr. Manoj, for inviting me to give this talk.
Thank you so much, Madam. Every session we get a lot of messages, and this was no exception. Rather allowing the nature to take its own course and beautiful philosophy and being substantiated by evidence. Thank you so much. Now we have a question answer session coming up, and I would like to invite two of the prominent neonatologists of the country. Professor Swarnarekha Bhatt, she is a legend by herself. All of us know her. Madam, welcome. And Dr. Mahendra Jain, he is a consultant neonatologist from Bhopal. Mahendra Jain, welcome. So over to you, both of you.
Thank you, Dr. Manoj, for the opportunity and for the wonderful work you're doing. And Dr. Nina, the talk was excellent.
Thank you.
I was wondering how you're going to cover such a large topic in such a short time, and you were perfect, 40 minutes to the time. Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
To start off with, I would like to reiterate the fact that you said that nutrition of preterms, we need to emphasize on human milk, mother's own milk. And I'm very happy that you mentioned not only the effort of the mother, the family, the unit, but also national policies which help mother to feed the baby, which I think is extremely important. Nutrition of preterm over the years have been changing recommendations. Human milk, formula, donor milk, formula, human milk, fortification, etc. But I think over the years, the goal has remained the same. Yes, we want optimum growth. And I'm very, very happy that Dr. Nina brought out this controversy of how should babies be growing. In spite of taking care of so many preterm babies, we still don't know how they should be growing. But I think the emphasis she made that too much is too bad is not good is something we need to take home as a take-home message. Other than growth, avoiding complications and promote optimal neurodevelopment. So from that point of view, too little is also not good. So whenever we talk about nutrition in preterm babies or anybody, I think we need to concentrate on optimum, and these issues Dr. Nina has highlighted. In addition to highlighting about the pros and cons of donor human milk and formula milk, the role of HMF, human milk fortification, and the emphasis on body composition and not just growth, and also about metabolic syndrome, and she's touched briefly on probiotics. Again, I repeat that it was really nice and very thought-provoking. There are a lot of questions, a lot of answers we still don't know. And I'm sure the discussion is going to be very fruitful. We already have quite a lot of questions. So I will start off with a few questions, and then I will hand over the stage, mic, whatever you want to call it, to Dr. Mahendra after some time. So one of the questions here on the question box, which I think is a very practical question when we talk about preterm feeding, is milk output better with a pump or by manual expression? So I thought it's one of something very important, practical. So Dr. Nina, I would like your opinion on that.
Thank you very much. That's a very, that question or that problem comes up again and again and again. And I think there's no honest one answer to that, because it depends upon the mum and what she prefers, but it also depends upon those who are supporting her. Now, it may be family members supporting her, or it may be hospital staff supporting her. And again, around the world, the ability, the sufficiency of staff to support a mother is very, very variable. And equally too, whether or not her family members are around her and able to support her is very variable too. So I'm afraid my view is that there is no one correct answer. And in a way, it would be wrong for us to say to a mother, this is the way you should do it. Probably it's best to say you can use manual expression or you can use a pump. It's a very personal choice, but what we absolutely want to do is support you in every way that works best for you to express milk for your baby.
Thank you, Dr. Nina. I think that is a very well thought of answer, because I'm sure, like we are saying, preterm nutrition should be individualized. I think even the way a mother expresses milk should be individualized. But having said that, I think if it's going to be for a longer duration of time, it may be easier on the mother to do not a manual expression, but again, it depends on the individual. So I hope the person who had asked the question, we get an answer. You got an answer that it depends on the mother, it depends on your unit, it depends on how long she needs to express, and it depends on the family support.
And I would add to that, if I may, that it also depends upon the type of pump, because there are many different types of pump available, and that is also a consideration. Personally, as somebody who has expressed milk, I would prefer a pump, but that is a very personal view indeed.
I think, Dr. Nina, I would agree with you about it, because I think it does become a little easier with a pump. But again, to this august audience, I'm sure everyone is aware of it, infection control. You need to be really careful that we don't give some contaminated milk to the baby, especially if you're going to be using pumps in the units. So please make sure that you have adequate infection control measures put in. The next group of questions, Dr. Nina, was about supplementation, vitamins, minerals, iron, etc. I'm sure you haven't touched upon this because of lack of time, but could you just give a brief comment on that?
Sure. So a baby being fed, a very preterm baby being fed own mother's milk will require, and I think I did put this in my presentation, will require phosphates and vitamin supplements, and of course iron supplements. But whether or not they need other mineral supplements, again, is not a universal issue. So all babies receiving human milk feeds will need, very preterm babies will need phosphate, vitamin, and iron supplements. But the other minerals are a matter of whether or not the baby individually needs it. Now, we would start phosphates. If you want to use phosphate supplements correctly to avoid metabolic bone disease, then I would say to you, you have to start early. So we will start as soon as a baby is getting at least 10 mils per kilo of human milk. We will start to give the very preterm baby 1 millimole BD twice daily of sodium acid phosphate. So we're starting very, very early indeed. And that is very effective at preventing metabolic bone disease of prematurity.
Dr. Nina, just a quick comment on vitamin D, because that's a big problem. So a comment on vitamin D supplementation.
So that's a controversial issue, as you know. There are advocates, and again, all vitamin doses are really not based on terribly good evidence. I think we all know that. And so there is a controversy about how much vitamin D a baby should have, whether we should stop at 400 international units, whether we should go up to 1,000 international units, and so on. I'm afraid nobody can give one the right answer. I think what we do need to be aware of, though, is of those populations where where the mother is at particularly high risk of vitamin D deficiency and be alerted. But I personally am not in favor of simply routinely giving babies very high vitamin D supplements. And certainly vitamin D has got no place in the prevention of metabolic bone disease of prematurity. That is primarily an issue of phosphate deficiency.
Thank you, Dr. Nina. But I think here in India, I don't know, there's a global audience, so I would like comments or chat in the chat box. You could make your comments, because we do see a lot of vitamin D deficiency in our population. And I think obstetricians have become a little more aware, and they, look at supplementing the mothers, etc. So I think we need to be aware. And I think they do need vitamin D, but I would agree about, how much is still, we're not very sure. And again, I would go with the flow, which Dr. Nina has been saying, too much is not good. I think we need to keep that in mind. I'll just look at the other questions which are coming up. Yeah, there was one question which really interested me here. I would like to read it out. So your final recommendation for feeding, is it no fortification at all? I don't think that is it, but I would like you to comment on that.
No, you're absolutely right, Professor Platt, you're absolutely right. That is not what I am saying. What I'm saying is that routine blind fortification for every baby receiving human milk is probably not wise, but I am not saying don't use fortification. The real challenge for us as a global neonatal community is to work out how best to identify the babies who are likely to benefit from fortification. Now, this is another very interesting area of quite a lot of debate, because there are those colleagues who feel that we should be measuring the content, the nutrient content of mother's milk. I do not agree with this. The reason I do not agree with this is because the content, the macronutrient content of human milk is, as I've shown you, very variable. So if you are truly going to want to know what you're feeding a preterm baby, you will have to pool mother's milk, measure the macronutrient content, and then give it to the baby, which I think is unwise. The second point is that you will also act on the assumption that you know what is the optimal macronutrient intake for a preterm baby, and we do not know what it is. So you will be artificially imposing your own personal view of what is optimum nutritional content and trying to achieve that level. And the third reason is that given that we don't know what the optimal macronutrient content is, given that the macronutrient content is very variable of human milk, is it right for us to tell mothers, actually, your milk may not be enough for your baby, we need to measure it? I think that is doing a great disservice to mothers. And again, it is part of the inappropriate over-medicalization of practice, which risks doing more harm than good. So until we know what we want to feed babies, I don't think we should be measuring human milk macronutrient content, except as a research exercise.
Thank you, Dr. Neena. I think I would entirely agree with you about that. As research, yes, but routinely. In fact, there were a couple of questions about how do we estimate protein? Do we need to routinely estimate composition? And I think you've answered it very well. I don't think there is any need in clinical practice to measure the mother's, the composition of her milk. A very interesting question, slightly off track, but I think this needs to be addressed. There's a question about CMV infection and mother's milk.
Yes, that's another very, very common question that comes up. I was speaking at a conference in Germany just at the weekend, and it came up again there because, of course, in Germany it's practice to pasteurize own mother's milk if the mother is CMV positive. Now, that is not practice in the UK. And if you take all the other countries around the world, you will find just as variable practice. So again, the bottom line is we don't know whether or not it's necessary to do this. We've all seen cases of postnatal acquisition of cytomegalovirus. We've also all seen babies who have been very seriously affected by this. But I have to say that these cases of serious postnatally acquired CMV infection, serious and postnatal, are very, very, very rare. And therefore, a prime consideration when trying to answer this question is not only what are the risks of a baby developing severe postnatal CMV infection from mother's milk, but what is the overall risk to benefit prevalence? Because by pasteurizing milk, you do reduce many of the important non-nutritional benefits of human milk. So unfortunately, I have to put my hand on my heart and say honestly again, that the risk to benefit research has not been done. And as I say, I think that before we start routinely pasteurizing mother's milk, before we give it to very preterm babies, we should be very, very careful to make sure that this is actually in the baby's overall benefit.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that question has been answered again very well. Before I hand over to Dr. Mahindra, because I think he also needs to take on some of the questions because a huge number of questions. There's one very interesting and again a controversial question about volume of milk. Again, I would agree about the 200 ml milk, but there is a question, would we increase the risk of PDA, et cetera, et cetera? So comment on that. And one more is about the frequency of feed. I think this we are a little more clear, but earlier I think we went through this 1 hourly, 2 hourly, 3 hourly, etc. So just to comment on the frequency of feed for a preterm or a very preterm unit.
Sure. So the first question about the volume of feeds. In 2021, we know absolutely that if a baby is tolerating human milk feeds, mother's milk feeds, going up to 200 mils per kilo is pretty standard practice in many parts of the world. And those areas where there's concern about PDA and bronchopulmonary dysplasia are really basing that on now very, very historic observational research from the 1980s, where in fact there was no control of it was a very different population of babies. They were considerably more unwell than the babies that we see today. But also there was confusion between the volume of fluid given to a baby and the volume of sodium intake. And if in those few randomized controls which were done, including one of my own, if you control for the level of sodium intake, the volume can be quite well tolerated by a preterm baby. So in 2021, there's absolutely no reason, if the baby is tolerating it well, to go up to 200 mils per kilo. And indeed, we very often go up above that if the baby is tolerating it well. And so it's a matter of clinical judgment. If the baby is vomiting, got abdominal distension, clearly you're not going to increase milk feeds. If the baby is tolerating it, there's no reason to be frightened of giving own mother's milk at that volume. What about the frequency of feeds? Well, again, there's been the to and fro over the years, how frequently should we feed? Should we use continuous feeds, bolus feeds, and so on? I think, again, the evidence, both the theoretical basis and such clinical research evidence as exists, is clearly in favor of using bolus feeds, not continuous feeds, for a number of reasons, and using continuous feeds only in very, very, very exceptional circumstances. So bolus feeds, whether you start with hourly feeds in the most immature, most fragile babies, I think is perfectly reasonable. But we would all aim to end up with 3 to 4 hourly bolus feeds.
Thank you. Dr. Mahendra, I think, can I hand over the mic to you, and would you take on the rest of the questions? There are quite a few questions. Some of it I have covered, but I think you can ask some of the questions.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Manoj, to giving me opportunity to, this is honor to me to ask question to Dr. Neena Modi, ma'am. And a lot of the literature we just, that we read in the, now this is the opportunity to interact with ma'am. So there is a questions covered that Swarnlata ma'am, that in a group, and so almost things are covered, but few questions are there, and these questions are related to practical difficulty. So one of a question is, sometimes we meet a difficulty with advancing breast milk, like baby does not open bowel and develop abdominal distension, though there is a no NEC, but in that situation, how to advancement of feed, what to do?
So I mean, intestinal dysmotility is very common in extremely and very preterm babies, particularly if these babies are very growth restricted. So it's not uncommon to have that sort of situation. Patience is what I would say. The best, obviously we are all worried about necrotizing enterocolitis, but I think a big concern that we should have as neonatologists is being too ready to stop feeds. We all know that the easiest thing to do in the world is to say stop feeds, stop feeds, stop feeds. And that means that babies go up and down and up and down and up and down. So if a baby is having difficulty tolerating feeds, it is really a matter of very careful clinical examination and clinical judgment. Has the baby got a distended abdomen? Is it a tender abdomen? Are there any inflammatory markers? Is there any evidence that the baby might genuinely, for example, have a septic ileus, or might genuinely be developing necrotizing enterocolitis? If the baby is on CPAP, we know it's very often to have a distended abdomen, but the baby is absolutely fine. So nobody can help you in this situation other than your expertise as a good doctor. And it is a matter of judgment about whether or not, if a baby is not tolerating feeds, whether you should stop feeds or whether you should reduce them. But I think that we run the risk of doing more harm than good by very, very, very frequently stopping and starting feeds. So careful clinical examination and careful clinical judgment is the mainstay.
This is the one of thing that few people are using prokinetics like things here that it is what your suggestion about that?
Yes, so prokinetic, the use of prokinetics, of course, it's very easy for us to give a medicine. It's easier for us to give a medicine than to actually examine the baby carefully and make a considered judgment. So there are no prokinetics that have been really clearly shown to be beneficial. Many of us too, many neonatologists around the world use glycerin suppositories, for example, to try and promote evacuation of meconium. But I repeat, the best stimulus to intestinal peristalsis is substrate, is food in the intestine, and therefore cautious bolus feeds has got to be the mainstay of practice. Whether prokinetic agents will ultimately be shown to be beneficial is a moot point, but as yet, there isn't substantial evidence for their use, and routine use of prokinetics, again, I don't think is justified.
Ma'am, this one more question that if bolus versus continuous feed, it is going to that baby come on full feed earlier. It's like what is the advantage of bolus over continuous infusion over bolus?
There's no advantage of continuous over bolus. There's lots of advantages of bolus over continuous. So the advantages of bolus over continuous are, firstly, as I say, that it stimulates intestinal peristalsis. Bolus feeds also stimulate a range of intestinal hormone release. And one of the big downsides of continuous feeds is that a lot of fat sticks to the tube and the tubing, and therefore the energy content that the baby ultimately gets is reduced. So there are no advantages of continuous feeds, but there are lots of advantages of bolus feeds.
Ma'am, in your slides, there is that the protein is good, but excess of protein also that is harmful effect on the baby. So one of a question, how we can estimate the content of protein in preterm mom?
Well, so the question is not how can we estimate the amount of protein in preterm milk. The question should be how can we judge how much protein a preterm baby needs. And that is a very difficult question because, as I said earlier, we don't know how much a preterm baby's protein requirement is. So we have to fall back on clinical assessment. And the way we fall back on clinical assessment is to use whatever tools are available to us at the moment. What are the tools that are available to us? We have weight gain, but we also have the blood urea. Now, if the blood urea, in the presence of normal renal function, if the blood urea is very high, then it suggests that we are giving the baby too much protein. If the blood urea is very low, then it suggests that all the protein we're giving a baby is being used by the baby, and we should feel reassured about giving more protein. So, and the third thing I would say is that the commonest reason for faltering weight gain, if you're giving a reasonable mum's milk intake of, as I say, at least 180 to 200 mils per kilo per day, the commonest cause of weight gain faltering in these babies is actually inadequate sodium intake, because preterm breast milk does not have a high sodium content, and the preterm baby, the very preterm baby, does not retain sodium well. So if you've got faltering weight gain and the baby's getting a good volume of milk intake, I would assess the effect of giving the baby a very small sodium supplement of 1 to 2 millimoles per kilo per day.
Absolutely.
If that isn't sufficient, I'd also look at the blood urea, and if the blood urea is very low, then I would use a fortifier. And if I don't have a commercial fortifier, then yes, it's perfectly reasonable to add a scoop of formula if you have no commercially available fortifiers present. So those are my practical very, very practical recommendations.
Ma'am, other than clinically, do you have some, can we get some help from Dopplers in a compromised, very low birth weight baby in terms of intestinal perfusion?
Yes. So again, there's lots of interest in using Doppler assessment, intestinal Doppler assessment, where we're worried about necrotizing enterocolitis. Now, I am not an expert in intestinal Doppler at all, but there are colleagues around the world who are doing some very, very good work trying to evaluate the utility of intestinal Doppler, and also using near-infrared spectroscopy to measure, for example, regional blood flow. So I think in the next few years, we're going to see much, much more information available about that.
Ma'am, that one that regarding few questions, human milk fortifier, that what is the exact time to start? It's half of the feed or once baby come on full feed? What is your?
Don't start it unless you are convinced that the baby really needs it.
Okay, ma'am.
Don't start it.
There is a few studies they recommend that they start day one on full feed in a very preterm babies. What is your experience on day one, no fluids, and start with feed in extreme preterm babies?
So if you're talking about very preterm babies, so babies below 32 weeks gestation, there is a randomized controlled trial currently going on in the UK, which is randomizing babies to receive full enteral feeds from day one versus gradual incremental feeds. And that will give the answer to that question. If we're talking about extremely preterm babies, so babies below 28 weeks gestation, they are not likely to be able to tolerate what we would call full feeds, i.e. 200 mils per kilo on day one. So therefore, you will have to start incrementally and build up as the baby tolerates it. And of course, there's also the question of when we should provide backup with parenteral nutrition. And that too is a risk to benefit equation. Certainly in our very preterm, extremely preterm babies, we will use parenteral nutrition as a backup. But there is a huge controversy too about the rate at which we should, the amount of parenteral nutrition we should use, and the rate at which we should advance, and the timing of commencement of parenteral nutrition. So that's a whole new other lecture, which is another controversial area.
One more question, that what is the preferred method of feeding, whether bottle feeding, cup feeding, or what do you think about this? That?
So again, the consensus view based on limited evidence is that certainly babies, very preterm babies, will transition to fully suck feeds slightly quicker if they are given tube or cup feeds. And certainly a baby below 32 weeks gestation is unlikely to be able to coordinate sucking and swallowing well, and therefore bottle feeds are not an option. But there is good data, very good data now, that shows that babies who are freely suckling do regulate their own energy and macronutrient intake. And so our goal should be to either cup feed or nasogastric tube feed, whatever is appropriate for your neonatal units, because there is a staffing consideration here as well. So whatever is appropriate for your neonatal unit, but to try and transition the baby to suck feeds at the breast as soon as the baby is developmentally capable of doing so.
I think that most of the things is covered, and there is still a lot of questions. If time is, Dr. Manoj, if allowed, then can I ask few more questions?
It's all up to Professor Modi and Madam. How much time shall we wind up, or should we take few more questions?
If you just let me check one moment when my next commitment is, just give me 1 second, please. My next call is, I'm sorry, I am already over late.
I know it is very unfair of us to ask this question. I was
Sorry.
very doubtful whether I should ask you this or just
I didn't notice the time. There were so many questions coming. You have a
we
fantastic.
just got engrossed in the lecture that the time just passed by.
I'm sorry, but I am late. I'm 10 minutes late for my last commitment. So I'm very
Apologies from our side, ma'am.
No,
Actually,
not at all. Your audience has been fantastic. Your seminar series is amazing, and I can only congratulate you.
thank you, ma'am.
I will try and join some of your future ones for my own.
Please, ma'am, and actually, we would be fortunate if you, if the travel regulations permit to have you in person with us for the grand final of the series, the IAP Neocon scheduled in March 12:30 in the conference at Thrissur, Kerala. So that will be a big honor for us. If not, at least virtually at that time. So it is
Thank
truly.
you very much. Because India is my country, so thank you very much for that invitation. And if I can, of course, I would be so honored to join you.
That's going to be a huge honor for us. Now, do I have the permission of the chairs for winding the session?
Yeah, please go ahead. Just one comment. I just want to tell everyone, and I'm sure Dr. Nina would agree with me, do not be scared of giving enteral feeds to small babies or big babies. Don't be scared. Don't worry about NEC. Don't worry about feed intolerance. Don't worry about abdominal distension. Watch the babies, but don't be scared of giving them oral feeds. Yeah, Manoj, thank you.
So thank you so much, Professor Nina Modi, to quote a senior colleague who has just remarked, a perfectly balanced presentation uncovering the myths surrounding the feeding of preterm infants. It was such a great talk. Thank you so much, madam.
Thank you very much. I'll say bye-bye to everyone.
Bye, madam. I would also like to thank the great moderators who made today's discussion very, very lively. Professor Sonarekha Bhatt and Professor Mahendra Jain. Thank you so much, sir and madam, for this great honor on us. And thank you.
Thank you, sir.
At the end, let me thank all of you, my dear friends, the respected attendees who have been with us in this series all this while. It is a great honor to have you with us for such a long duration. And it is actually, we are going to have some more excellent talks coming up. We are shifting gears from the preterm nutrition to neonatal neurology now with the another elegant lecture by Professor Francis Kovan on neonatal stroke on 21st of October, same time, virtually. So I cordially invite all of you to join us in this series as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mahendra. Thank you.